Hi, my name is Liz Seuss, and this is my 2010 Ford Sprinter van. Just kidding, that's not me, and that's not my van.
I'm a first-generation grad student, and my car is a 2003 Toyota Corolla.
But if you're on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube, you've probably seen a video like the one that I just described, part of a trend called van life.
This is our 2019 Mercedes Sprinter 170-inch wheelbase.
Van life is a global trend, and it's been on social media for a few years now. But like the sales of hand sanitizer, it increased significantly during the pandemic. You can find people doing van life on basically every continent, except Antarctica, as far as I know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up there too.
It's literally everywhere.
I've been following van life for over a year and a half now, and have gone through the mind shifts of, what is this? Why would anyone want to do this? Oh my gosh, I want to do this as soon as possible. And oh no, this actually seems really hard, and yikes, it seems like there's actually a lot of social issues in this space, as there are in most spaces. So, long story short, van life is cool and seems to make sense for a lot of people. But there's a lot more going on than you might get from a 30-minute van tour video or a 10-second TikTok. Van life fits into a larger concept of people living mobile, nomadic lifestyles, whether by choice or by force. So we're actually going to expand the term to include a wider variety of these lifestyles and deconstruct van life as vehicle dwelling. So what is vehicle dwelling? Vehicle dwelling is when people live primarily out of their vehicles rather than a sedentary housing situation. This includes vehicles ranging from luxury RVs to, say, a more compact Toyota Corolla. Depending on the vehicle you have, you might have enough space to build in a bathroom with a copper tub, or you might have a designated bucket, portable toilet, or nothing at all. This sort of lifestyle can be done temporarily as a means of travel, similar to camping, allowing you to get to know places you may have never been before.
Capitol Reef, Canyonlands.
But it's also a lifestyle that has a lack of visibility for those in situations that aren't typically portrayed in social media as desirable.
But it matters how we portray things, and that we provide visibility to all people groups.
If you're like me from a year ago, dreaming of owning a van and taking it all over the country, you might be in for a shock. But what if vehicle dwelling isn't just granola and adventurous? What if there are systems of oppression involved in it? Can you imagine?
Nomadland.
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 Actually, you probably can't imagine thanks to Nomadland, a 2020 film written and directed by Chloe Zhao based on the book by Jessica Bruder of the same name that explored the life of a woman forced into vehicle dwelling and migrant work after her husband died. The film, most of whose actors were from a real-life community of vehicle dwellers, won the Oscar for Best Picture and sparked national conversation about the fine line between vehicle dwelling out of necessity and the hashtag vanlife movement.
Basically, there's not just one type of person doing vehicle dwelling. It's complex, and it can vary depending on how much money you have, race, gender, age, and so much more. I talked to a handful of people that shared their experiences with vehicle dwelling and how they got into this sort of lifestyle.
Several years ago, so probably like right after I graduated high school, I started to see it on Instagram and everything. I was like, what? This is so cool. I had no idea how to get to that point. So I kind of just left it on the back burner, and I was like, one day I'm totally going to do this.
Because of the coronavirus, we definitely felt fortunate to be able to just leave our situation, and we had the money to be able to to not just be worried about how we were going to pay our mortgage next month.
Yeah.
Since I didn't have a job and fortunately she was a teacher at the time, so she was going to get paid all the way through August of last year. And we had enough money saved up that we could take advantage of the fact that the country was shut down and nobody knew what was happening, and we could just go explore.
And it was like relatively cheap living.
It was.
We weren't
And
spending much money
right.
at all.
And all the money we were spending was on gas, basically.
Y ese deseo de conocer primero nuestra relación con la naturaleza y de conocer distintas personas, culturas, de movernos, de estar en movimiento y de no imaginarnos el inicio y el fin de la vida en un mismo lugar. La verdad es que es una vida mucho más económica, sí. Gracias a Dios, nosotros no nos falta el dinero, gracias a Dios. No es que nos sobra, pero tampoco nos falta. Tenemos nuestro hogar, que es lo que alquilaríamos. O sea, no nos falta, no lo hacemos por pobreza.
I think our trip to Utah last summer made it very easy to say yes to this.
Yeah.
Because out there, it was all about being out in nature and seeing everything around you.
So we have been very fortunate in that we have gotten debt-free and stayed debt-free. And now we're enjoying the fruits of all of that labor and not non-fun. All of our friends went on vacations every year. We didn't. We saved our money. We paid off our debt. Now we live our vacation.
The vehicle dwellers that you just met were financially stable, and their motivation was more from a desire to explore and understand the world in a new way. And in Ariana's case, like mine, social media, like Instagram, played a large role in the visibility and perception of the concept of vehicle dwelling for her.
I first came across vehicle dwelling through YouTube videos, and it was all van life. After hours of these videos, I became interested in the idea of vehicle dwelling and the adventure and freedom of it all. Then I started asking friends and family what they thought about vehicle dwelling, or hashtag van life.
What do you think of van life?
Van life? Stop asking me about this. Stop trying to make van life happen. It's not going to happen.
I think it allows you to be closer to nature or less tied down.
When I first ever heard of it, I thought it was very peculiar. I thought of hippies, and I was like, oh, they're just traveling wanderers. But it actually seems kind of freeing.
It seems like a reasonable way to live. It sounds cheap.
Well, a lot of people say they want to sell everything and travel the world. How about you?
I think you can make it work. We just have its own challenges.
I'd be open to it. Not permanently.
No sé qué es eso.
Como vivir en el vehículo.
Ay, no. Para mí sería incómodo. Dentro del vehículo, ¿no?
Sí.
Claro. No. No hay como la libertad. Salir afuera.
I want to say no. That's not something I could do, but I think that's because I've restricted myself to considering housing in the way it's been presented traditionally in the States. You have to live between a bunch of cement blocks and different things. And immediately when I think of a vehicle, I'm like, wow, it's so much less space. You're not supposed to be in a car for that long, or a motorized vehicle, whether it's a bus. Maybe it is something I could do, but I think up until this point, it isn't something I thought about.
Camille brings up an amazing point about our awareness and perceptions. How we view housing and the concept of vehicle dwelling might affect how we view those who are in that space, and if we would want to do that as well.
Nawalia brings up how her extended family has criticized her and her husband's decision to take their two small children for life on the road.
Sienten que por ser nómade o por querer vivir así, sos pobre. Digamos, yo me tomo todo con mucho humor igual a esta altura, ¿eh? a veces dentro de la misma familia nuestra es como, pero ustedes están locos, ¿por qué no hacen un trabajo duro? Y como toda la gente normal solamente trabajan, pagan sus cuentas y se jubilan y ya. Y entonces como que sos visto como que sos vago o sos pobre o no sé, no tenés ganas de progresar.
Though it may be hard to understand for some, the simplicity of this lifestyle and the affordability of it makes it attractive to many who are feeling burnt out and disillusioned by the not so long ago established traditional 9 to 5, or are tired of paying down a mortgage for a house they don't even get to enjoy living in. This is the kind of mindset that leads people like myself to see the freedom and romantic side of vehicle dwelling as so appealing. So I don't really care too much if people think I'm a weirdo for wanting to live out of a camper van. However, perceptions of vehicle dwellers that affect those who are stable will affect those who are precarious more deeply. Why? Because they're already vulnerable, and their situation may not be fully understood. And while there has been an increase in awareness of these spaces, social media and movies like Nomadland only provide a snapshot of a larger system and don't encompass the challenges that different people groups might encounter while vehicle dwelling, such as classism.
How do you describe it? It's almost like there's a class system in this. What you are seeing currently, I would say, is either middle class or upper middle class in terms of this lifestyle. You go out of this park and you go half a mile down the road to the bridge that's right here before you come into the park. There's a white van.
He comes into the park here.
Yep.
He'll drive in the park and
Yep.
park down there and go walk around, look at the dam, or park by the dam.
He lives in that thing full time. He got curtains hang up in the front of his van. It's not even really a van. It's more like an SUV.
Yeah.
So we have no idea how he's doing it. Could he be treated differently than someone who has a massive RV? Yeah, there is a bit of a discrimination in terms of income. There is even a discrimination in certain parks where I couldn't bring my 10-foot trailer in there. It has to be at least a Class C of this size for you to be able to park it in this park. Those are private parks. Those are more high-end parks. You're paying $200 a night to stay there. I get it. That's your park, the way you want to run it. But in state parks, parks like this, we're all equal.
Alec describes the situation of a fellow vehicle dweller and the social challenges that he might face due to the vehicle he owns, and how others may perceive that as undesirable to welcome into their space. Apart from social challenges, there are real fears and concerns surrounding vehicle dwelling. Not just because it's different or new, but because of larger systemic issues that intersect all facets of life. And with that, we have to unpack the precarity of living in a vehicle, whether you're doing it by choice or by force, regardless of the vehicle that you have. I got to talk to Dr. Thomas Nail, a doctor of philosophy at the University of Denver. Dr. Nail studies and analyzes movement, developing a philosophy of movement. In his book, The Figure of the Migrant, Dr. Nail unpacks various figures of migration. Since he has a deep historical and political understanding of the complexities of being a migrant, we had an open conversation about vehicle dwelling and his thoughts on how it may be perceived versus the actual experiences that people are living in this space.
Vehicle dwelling is more precarious. It does make people more vulnerable to sleep in cars than to be sleeping in houses. So that affects different groups disproportionately. Women and people of color are more likely to be harassed by police if they're sleeping in their vehicles. They're more likely to be assaulted and attacked by nationalist groups or just whatever kinds of bigoted people are out there. So we have to think about race, class, and gender as being sort of part of the precarity of sleeping in a car. It's not just like everybody can sleep in the car equally safe or in every place safe. There are really dangerous places in this country, and you don't necessarily, as a woman or person of color, want to be out there in the countryside in a car. Statistically, I doubt that is, as safe as they might have experienced it as an individual. So anyway, that's part of my perspective too, is just looking at things from a structural vantage point, like a bigger lens out. You're gonna start to see trends that are, these bigger patterns, which you may not even realize. Like, oh yeah, I just thought I'd move into a van and like travel around. Great. But you can't just look at vehicle dwelling from one lens. It's not just one group of people, and it's not even just about their experience, which may be great. It might have sucked. Who knows? That's not the end of that story. That's like not even the story. Like the bigger story is like, how is that working at a structural level, and who's getting advantaged by that? Who's being made increasingly precarious, and who's being advantaged?
Many people may be taken advantage of or discriminated against for reasons outside of these. However, at a systemic level, we do see people being treated differently due to race and gender and class, and ethnicity and age, and sexual orientation, and also, you get the picture. As Nail describes, and many already know, people of color are not as comfortable or confident being in recreational spaces, which is where many vehicle dwellers entering this space by choice tend to stay, because it's safer than parking on streets or public parking lots where it may be illegal or seen as undesirable for people to sleep in their cars. My friend Fauna shares personally what some of her concerns and insecurities might be entering the space of vehicle dwelling overall.
I think just being a woman and just hearing about all the violence that exists, I think it just is a little too nerve-wracking for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that race also like has something to play into that?
Are you asking about like the...
Feeling like insecure or unsafe maybe?
Yes. I think when it comes to like violence against women, I think with that I feel like it sort of transcends race at times, but I think being a black woman, I do fear that I would be more susceptible in some circumstances.
Yeah.
Especially if I were, let's say if I were doing it hypothetically in an area that is predominantly white or upper class, I think I would be afraid of being viewed as a threat. Or being in an area that is lower income, I think I'd just be afraid about the violence that might be present there too.
While Fauna's concerns are grounded in truth, and statistically, people of color are less likely to be in recreational spaces such as national parks and campgrounds, there has actually been an increase in people of color in recreational spaces, and there are people of color doing van life. I will tell you though, when I started watching these videos at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, I was not seeing any videos besides retired, sold everything and bought an RV or a van, or the white 20-something traveling digital nomad influencer type. I was unaware of the people living in the fringes, living in their cars because they have nowhere else to go until the end of 2020, about 6 months after I had started watching these videos. And even when people do enter this lifestyle by choice, they still face a lot of challenges that are out of their control and should not be overlooked, whether it's due to a global pandemic or other external factors such as natural disasters. These challenges can give us a glimpse into what protections we surrender when we choose or are forced to become migrants.
And there were definitely like times that were not great, that I was just like, why are we doing this? It's so hot outside. It's so hot in this car. Why can't we go anywhere else but this car? I think the weird part of that is like there weren't really any other options, you know? It's not like you can be, like we had the means to be able to be somewhere else, but like it's not like you can rent a hotel room, you know what I mean? Like there's not like a reprieve. So, because there was just nothing open, there weren't any other options but like sleep in the car or sleep outside. And so sometimes I felt like we were like stuck, you know? We're just like, man, I just want to shower. Like, why is it so hard to find a place where I can shower?
The reason we drove around a neighborhood in Salt Lake City was because there were 2 wildfires right outside the city. And so all the state parks were like, you could stay here, but the fire is on its way and they haven't put it out yet. But like if you want,
it smells horrible.
And yeah, it was like the sky was ominous because it was just like smoke everywhere.
Yeah.
And the wind was blowing.
Thankfully, Ben and Michael could pick up and go when they saw the wildfires approaching, but vehicle dwellers experiencing homelessness may not have the means to pay for gas to just get up and leave. Besides a global pandemic and natural disasters, there are a number of other risks that vehicle dwellers face as migrants. People may perceive migrants as an exception, not within the confines of normal, quote-unquote, society. But it's actually how societies develop, and even today we can see it's not the exception, as 1 billion people are considered migrants of some form. Not all of these people are living in their car, FYI. But that's already a significant portion of the population that is projected to increase even more in the next 25 years. With a dramatic increase in people becoming vehicle dwellers, it's important to understand how people are economically vulnerable to exploitations through cycles of economic extraction.
The cycle is that people are supposed to work. The goal is to extract, at least economically speaking, to extract labor from the people. And the problem is that the markets rise and fall. So their need for workers rises and falls. And not all workers want to move. So some jobs can be relatively stable and some markets are stable, and there are markets that are unstable. And those unstable markets require all the movement of people. And so that could be people moving from house to house, but more likely it's people moving in a car, sleeping in that car at different Amazon facilities, different campgrounds, agricultural works and harvesting and things like that. So those people move around in the cars, and then sleeping in the car is a criminalized activity in many places. So the people are typically fined. So there's a kind of extraction at another level. So there's an economic extraction where they go to work and then they get economically exploited. And then there's a kind of juridical exploitation, or they go to jail and they have to pay bail fees, or they have to pay court fees and all these things. So there's a way in which local governments can extract something from these people too. And sort of even further, if they go to jail, then they have a criminal record. So the jails, obviously, those are there are a lot of private jails, and those private jails end up extracting money too, because they're being paid for by taxes. It's $200 a bed per night. So they have an interest, private prisons do, in keeping people in jail for as long as possible, because they're getting paid quite a lot of money. So by going into jails, or if it were the case of immigration detention centers, there's money to be made out of that extraction, money to be extracted from those migrants as well. If they're citizens, then they now have a criminal record, and that's strategically advantageous too. They're going to be offered lower wages. So studies show that people with criminal records, especially felony charges, will be given lower wages if they're given any work at all. And the types of work that they're going to get are going to be dirty, dangerous types of jobs. So that keeps this group of people in this industry, living in their cars more and more. As they are made to live in their cars, it becomes harder and harder to get out of living in a car if they don't want to be living in that car. Their options become slimmer and slimmer.
So I have another hard story to share with you, and it's from Alan, who shared about the mental effects of living in a state of precarity and working to be unseen within that space.
The end of 2015, I had lost a job that I had for about 2 years because I had become depressed. I knew of a homeless shelter. I tried to get in there. Well, they didn't have any beds open at the time. So that's when the first time that I lived out of my car began. I had a minivan. The van had tinted windows, which I was thankful for. And, being homeless, you have to account for where are you going to go to the bathroom. It's difficult to describe how you feel in those situations, the allowances you make, that you allow yourself to make. it's humiliating, and you feel that, and you just do things out of that you wouldn't do under normal circumstances.
Unfortunately, Ellen's experience is not unique, and a lot of people are having to live in a state of precarity due to rising rents and housing prices. For example, California is a state with the nation's largest unhoused population. And of those 130,000 unhoused people, 17,000 were found unhoused but living in their cars or another vehicle in 2019. This number of people not only includes the chronically unhoused, but full-time workers, families, and couples who can't afford the state's high cost of living. But then, in places like Los Angeles County, car dwelling was actually illegal. So just like Thomas Nail said, people were being criminalized for this lifestyle that they had been forced into. This ordinance was sunset in early 2020, but recently there has been a push to bring it back with larger fines and harsher consequences for offenders. The reality is that when policies like this are put into place, people have nowhere to go, and they may be struggling to meet basic needs as a result of their new vulnerable state.
Fear for the protection and well-being of people who are doing it from a place of necessity, because I think it also brings to light that there are probably other things they're struggling with, like maybe food insecurity or financial stability.
Unfortunately, Fauna is right, and the implications of being a vehicle dweller go beyond just the physical needs being met, but emotional needs are put at risk as well. I got to talk to Kara Krager, a local social worker, who shared about the challenges of having to report local families that are found living in their vehicles.
Usually we'll be contacted by law enforcement that they've come across a family who is dwelling in their vehicle. By law, we do have to report that, and so what we try to do is work with the family to determine, are there any supports that we can identify or plans or situations that we can put in place to avoid their current circumstance, which is have them in the vehicle and get them temporarily housed or sheltered. Well, because I work with children, I mostly encounter small children and their parents living in their vehicle together. Most commonly for me in like the Walmart parking lot. I've had encounters where teenagers may reside in their vehicle as well. It usually is families of color, low socioeconomic status. I've not really come across like a wanderer kind of wanderlust family situation, but I think it's more of a question, honestly, of are their basic needs being met? And most of the time with the families that I'm encountering in the situations that we're being called about, it's because the answer is no.
This is a scary reality for families to have to face, because they're already experiencing challenges in accomplishing their daily living activities, but they also are running the risk of losing each other. This also brings up questions of how will future policy account for people who are seasonal employees in different states? What laws exist in this space already, and how are people being affected by them? What will school districts do to prevent or encourage the matriculation of children of vehicle-dwelling families? The good news is there are already solutions, and we can look to other countries for help. For example, Noelia shares about the education system in Argentina that has allowed her and her family to travel as migrants, but also prioritize their children's education to set them up for a stable future.
En este momento toda la vida nómade sobre ruedas está en un boom, cada vez hay más, está estallando, y la verdad es que la educación a distancia hace más tiempo que se viene desarrollando. Por lo tanto, hay un montón de programas que se pueden llevar a cabo. Acá en Argentina está el ejército argentino, digamos, las Fuerzas Armadas tienen un programa dado que ellos envían gente al exterior, a las misiones de paz, entonces los hijos de estas personas, de militares, pueden estudiar con estos programas que ahora están abiertos a todos, a civiles o a militares, no solo para las fuerzas, sino que como familia vos podés pagar el programa de estudio y lo educás a tus hijos. Y los profesores de todas maneras te van dando herramientas para que puedas enseñar. Eso con respecto a la educación de los chicos. De todas maneras, si vos estás en un lugar donde querés que se escolaricen, por ejemplo, a nosotros nos viene bien cuando están en la escuela porque es un tiempo extra para nosotros solos, porque somos papá 24/7. Entonces, también lo puedes anotar en la escuela para que vayan un tiempito mientras continúa con el plan de educación a distancia. Pueden compartirse.
With a changing landscape, other questions arise about citizenship for vehicle dwellers as well. Apart from education, such as the rights that we are afforded as U.S. citizens that are tied to having a permanent address. There are ways around being disenfranchised by not having a permanent address, such as having a P.O. box or using a friend or family member's address. But those assume certain privileges and connections and stability that not everyone has access to. There is still a lot we can't know because people living as vehicle dwellers by force most likely aren't documenting their experiences on social media. They're likely avoiding attention as much as possible. But with all that we do know, how do we protect those that are in the precarious situation of vehicle dwelling?
A lot of my concerns and expectations I would mainly place on local government, because I think they do have responsibility to protect citizens, and I think they have the means and ability to. And I think even just thinking about, again, the fact that people who are vehicle dwelling and doing it from a place of necessity, they may not have the means to even invest in security measures. They are likely in survival mode, trying to just nourish themselves, meet their basic needs. Something that came to mind is maybe having some sort of like private lot, or a lot owned by the state or by an organization, where there are food refrigerators with stocked constantly with food, so that it would be gated, and constantly guarded by security 24/7. I think that way people could at least have a sense of relief knowing that they're being protected, food is accessible. And so I think those are some things that came to mind of ways that the city or organizations can better support the needs of those living out of their car or vehicle.
Fauna's idea actually exists in multiple places already. I have a friend in California who mentioned that her church is doing something exactly like this. They're using their parking lot as a sanctuary for those who are experiencing living in their vehicles. And so this is a safe space where the church owns the property and vehicle dwellers can come and stay. And there are multiple safe parking lots popping up all over the country, such as Halo Now and Move Mountain View. So these solutions are being put into practice already by various institutions. There are also groups focused specifically on shedding light to the underrepresented people groups in the space of vehicle dwelling by choice. For example, Ariana told me about an organization called Diversifying Van Life.
There's an organization called Diversify Van Life, and they are an amazing source to for people of color, and they highlight a lot of queer, transgender, so not just people of color, but just diversity in general. So there's definitely resources for everyone to be able to get involved and feel like they're a part of the community, because it's definitely not as common to see people of color living this lifestyle, but there's a lot of people doing it, but they're not as highlighted.
I'm not here to offer the perfect solution because I don't have one, or to try to make people feel bad about van life, because long story short, it's complicated. There are benefits to being outside, and certain types of vehicle dwelling seem like viable and positive options for many people and their families when certain supports and stabilities are in place. And despite the uncertainty of a global pandemic, a lot of families and people took to domestic vehicular travel during the outbreak, and recreational vehicles are in really high demand right now. The transition to virtual work even gave rise to a group of digital nomads all over the world. And with social media, we get to see a lot of people share about these experiences in detail and how they were able to simplify and reorient their lives through vehicle dwelling. And that's not a bad thing. We can celebrate our friends doing van life or RV travels or other versions of nomadic lifestyles. But let's just be aware of the perceptions we have and may unknowingly support. Did you think anyone could be a van lifer and be fine? I might have at one point. I also didn't think about the possibility of families being forced into this and all the issues that might be wrapped up into that. There's a lot to be done, but there's a lot that we can do now. We can unpack these questions that we've brought up, and maybe there are a lot of things that you have questions about that I didn't touch on at all. This matters not just for me or for you, but for everyone. So moving forward, I want to ask you, what are we setting up for the next generation? Are we allowing some to get stuck in a cycle of forced vehicle dwelling? Or are we creating space for the option of stability and safety in a permanent residence? And even now, for those who are in unstable economic circumstances and who must face the additional challenges of discrimination based off whatever it may be, we have to address the challenges brought up here as well as the many others that one short documentary can't cover. So let's get to work!
Los árboles tienen raíces y ellos nacen y mueren por sus raíces en el mismo lugar, pero nosotros tenemos pies para ser nómades, para poder movernos. Y más si tenés una casa con ruedas.